Hey everybody, thanks for tuning into this episode of Navigate. I'm your host, Tim Austin, and whether you're leaving something behind, adjusting to something new, or you're in the middle somewhere and you're trying to make sense of it all, my hope is that these conversations provide you with valuable tips, resources, and encouragement for your unique transition journey. My guest on the show today is Dennis Conrad. For over 10 years, Dennis has been Director of Intercultural Ministries for the Northern California, Nevada District of the Assemblies of God, which means he has been serving as liaison between the District Resource Center and culture-specific churches. Dennis and his wife Linda were associate pastors in youth ministry and Christian education in Susanville, Orangevale, and Modesto, California. Dennis has an MA in education and he taught 25 years in California public schools, and Linda worked as a principal secretary for over 20 years and has taught children's church most of her life. The Conrads lived in Fiji from 2002 to 2007, where they taught at the South Pacific Bible College. And in their current role, they have been privileged to visit several other countries represented by churches in the Northern California area, including Tonga, Samoa, Ukraine, and Russia. They have also been guest teachers of English at Evangel Bible College in Myanmar on 4 different occasions. Dennis and Linda have developed a love for people of other cultures and believe that God has sovereignly placed them in their position. And I just know as you listen to this conversation, you're going to sense Dennis's heart for people in general, and specifically for the many churches made up of immigrants to the U.S. and their children and their grandchildren. So again, thanks for joining, and let's dive into my conversation with Dennis Conrad. Okay, well, I'm really excited, Dennis, for this conversation. We haven't spent a lot of time together at all. We had a brief encounter last year sometime when I popped into the district office and met you, but and we've been talking a little bit before we started this podcast conversation. So
I have loved it.
Yeah. So have I, and we could talk for hours, I'm sure. Just I really appreciate your heart, and I think we would find that we have a lot of similar desires and passions around working cross-culturally or serving within the context of diversity, ethnic diversity, and cultural diversity. So there's a lot of things there, and maybe we'll touch on some of that in this conversation.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So, speaking of diversity, and I've told my listeners have heard part of my story, bits and pieces of my story of serving overseas for 20 years and then transitioning back to the U.S. Several years ago. And one thing I miss is that cultural and ethnic diversity that I experienced so much of that has been such an integral part of my life.
It's enriching.
Very enriching. Yeah. And so, it's kind of humorous how God works, because he could have, when we came back to the States several years ago, he could have plopped us down even in the Sacramento Valley area, where there's a lot more diversity than where we are.
Placerville, not so much.
Placerville area up in the Sierra Nevada mountains, not so much. Right. God has a sense of humor. He's helping me come to terms with some of that, but I get the itch to mix and mingle in a culturally more diverse context. And so I have to go seeking those out.
There you go. Yes.
Or having these kinds of conversations with brothers who have been there or are doing that. So, yeah. So we sit for, this is kind of just a side note, but when we served it in an international church context in Turkey, it was probably in a church service, there were probably 20 plus ethnic groups represented in that one church service. And so that's just, like you said, enriching and a bit of a taste of heaven, I think.
I think so. Yeah.
So anyways, I want my listeners to hear what you do. So can you kind of just tell us, as the Director of Intercultural Ministries within the Northern California, Nevada District Assemblies of God movement, what is it that you do?
Yes, Jim. It's first of all, it's an honor to be able to share with you. I appreciate the opportunity so much. And I have the privilege of working with about 100 second language or culture-specific churches here in the NorCal, Nevada District. I think the key word would be I serve as liaison between the District Resource Center, or what they still call the district office, and ministers of our ethnic churches. Many of those are a part of what we call our ethnic fellowships. We have 5 of them: Filipino, Tongan, Fijian, Samoan, and Slavic, which means they have at least 6 or more churches that work together in a cooperative way to keep in touch with their cultural churches. But then there are a lot of individual churches: Indian, Hispanic, Chinese, Brazilian, Armenian, Iranian, African, and more. And then now recently, deaf churches have been added to the Intercultural Ministries department.
So in all these different ethnic churches are with just within the Sacramento or NorCal, Nevada.
A lot in the Bay Area. And like you said, Sacramento, we have a lot of Slavic, and it's interesting. There are a few more islanders in the Bay Area, but both Sacramento, generally speaking, the Valley area. But yeah, you're right. Those 2 areas are the main focus.
Yeah. Okay. And what? Just curious, what drew them to this area, and probably different reasons for different groups?
Yeah, good question. I think many times they end up migrating where they have family already. Yeah. And Sacramento has been a hub for transitioning immigrants. And, of course, the Bay Area offers all kinds of job opportunities. The problem, of course, is being able to afford housing. But they seem to get by. They often have multiple families living together, so that gets them by. Yeah. And, one of the things I wanted to share is that most of these pastors, they're incredibly gracious, humble, respectful, but they're reluctant to speak out. So my job, I think, or my ministry is to help develop relationships so that there's someone they can call and feel free to ask questions. I love it when someone will tell me, I feel a little intimidated by the executive officers, but I feel like I can talk to you. I love to hear that kind of feedback. Yeah. Not that they feel in any way distant from our executives, but they know that I'm wanting to be there as their friend. And that means a lot to me.
Yeah. To be approachable.
There you go.
On that level is so important. And I could see where that could be kind of intimidating for some of our immigrant church leaders to go to, connect with the top guy, and
especially when their English is limited and they feel like they can't fully express their heart.
Right.
So it gives me an opportunity to, quote, be there for them. I'm their go-to guy, and I often will laugh and say, I probably don't have the answer, but I know people who have answers, so I can connect you.
Yeah. So resourcing them.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Are most of these so these churches, as you've mentioned, some of them are I assume networked together better than others?
Yes.
Some of them are kind of standalone.
Yes,
as well.
Definitely. That's a problem for them. Yeah.
Okay. So the ones that are standalone, kind of, they don't really have a community or a network of churches that they work with or collaborate with. That must be a challenge. How do you help to resource those?
Yeah, honestly, Tim, that's an area I think of weakness, because I tend to spend a lot of time with the 5 networks, the fellowships, because they're involved. We actually give their fellowship president or chairman, whatever the title is, a position on our district presbytery. Okay. So they have opportunity to get a little bit involved. They don't say much in presbytery meetings, but they're there. But the individual churches tend to get lost. And I encourage them to get involved in their sections on geographical and connect with the local presbyter. But it's difficult. Many of them are bivocational, and so often section ministers' meetings are during the week when it's not convenient for them to attend. And again, when they do, they're reluctant to engage. So that's the essence of, I think, one of the challenges we face as a district. How do you make these good people feel like they're not just a distant but a connected part of our district? It's a challenge.
That's a challenge. Okay. Yeah. So you mentioned before when we were talking earlier that you want to help churches connect with their second and third generation children who have been Americanized, you put it, and in the school systems and so forth. I want to talk more about that, but first, what are some impactful experiences that prepared you and your wife and kind of led you to take on this role? Because between you and your wife, you have over 45 years, right, of working within public school systems. You are public school teachers.
Right.
And people will learn about that, and they can read more about that in your bio in the show notes. But tell me more about that and how you got from there to here.
Yes, it's a process that when I look back on it, I can see the hand of the Lord. But while I was in it, I often wondered if I knew where I was going. Well, I didn't know where I was going. I started out in public education as a teacher with a state credential, and found a job in my parents' hometown where I helped start a continuation high school. And that was one of those experiences where, as a teacher, I think I learned more than my students. But after 4 years teaching, I was working with our church youth group, and I was spending more and more time with the church and less time preparing for my teaching. And I took a year's leave of absence and never went back. So I launched into full-time ministry that included youth and Christian ed. And I did realize along the way that the roles of a pastor and a role of a classroom teacher are really similar.
Okay. In what ways?
Both I think are attempting to guide, to encourage, to develop, to make people help people mature, and to resource them, people that are under their care. So both of them kind of have a flock, if you will, to encourage.
Yeah.
And then when our kids grew older, my wife stepped into education. She was a principal secretary, so very involved in organization and planning things, which has always been a help to me. But then our senior pastor resigned after a couple positions, and I thought I would go back in the classroom just temporarily. And 20 years later, I realized that I was not feeling fulfilled. Teaching English and history was a privilege, but I just wanted to do more. And so we got radical and felt that we should step out of the boat and ended up taking an early retirement, actually, and sold our home. Never forget that. We packed everything up. It was crazy. And we left for Fiji, not really knowing. We visited quickly once, and we felt, when we got off the plane, Tim, it was, I don't know how you felt as a missionary, but we got off the plane, both of us looked at one another. Honestly, we said, this feels like home.
Wow. And you were just arrived there. Had you had previous visits to there?
Not to Fiji, no. Wow. We'd been in the South Pacific, went to French Polynesia a couple times, and just loved the South Pacific. And I didn't realize that Fijians are Melanesian, not Polynesian, but the same gracious, warm, hospitable, just such a giving community. We loved it. We were one of the few white faces in a crowd of black people. And it was always funny because they'd say, Brother Dennis, don't look for us. We'll find you. You stand out in the crowd. So it was always fun to feel like they so warmly welcomed us. So we taught at the South Pacific Bible College. I taught English and Christian ed, and we did a class on marriage, cross-cultural marriage. That was fun. Anyway, we were there for 5 years and thought we'd be there till the Lord returned. But amazingly, once again, retirement of my leader forced me to make a change. Still remember getting an email saying, your senior pastor, the senior missionary is retiring, you may also. And I thought, no, that's not right. That doesn't make sense. Once again,
so it seems to be a little theme here that others' transitions impact our trajectory, right?
Exactly. And I've learned that the doors that opened for me in my past often were trap doors. Like, oh no. And later I could look back and say, Lord, that was you. So we ended up coming back confused, disappointed. But again, a long story. But not too long after we got back, the assistant superintendent, Dr. Sam Huddleston, came to me and asked if I'd be interested. And now we get to work with the same people we work with in Fiji, plus others. It's just been such an incredible thing. And now we're with our granddaughters that we so much missed when we were overseas. So the Lord is so gracious. I look back now and say, okay, Lord, thanks for the process. It wasn't always enjoyable, but you put us in a position that's just amazing.
And I love to encourage my listeners about this with that there is life on the other side of transition, because you can lose hope in a situation like that, especially when it was really no choice. Kind of the rug pulled out transitions. Really wasn't our choice to move out. It was a leader's choice or someone we worked under, and that just totally sends our world spinning. And so I just love to encourage my listeners with these stories of how there is life. hope on the other side of transition. It's a process. It takes time, but to see how now you have the best of both worlds, being near your grandkids, but working in a very diverse, in your own way, crossing,
absolutely,
cultures and ethnic groups, and working.
Yeah, and as I shared with you, Tim, before we started recording, I had the privilege of going back to Fiji just a month ago, and it was so rewarding to find students that we had in our class over 10, 12, 14 years ago now, who are now pastoring churches in Fiji, and to hear them say, I mean, they were being very gracious, as islanders are, but they would say, "Oh, you had such an impact on our lives."
Yeah.
And there were times when, especially when I was leaving, where I felt like the political aspect of any system, AG is not above it. We all have times where we say, "What is going on?" And in spite of all that, the Lord was there. I'd love to encourage anybody who's discouraged.
Yeah.
God knows where you are. He's got your back.
Good. Love that. Yeah. Well, going back to the churches that you work with in this big district, there's over how many churches?
450.
Over 450 churches in this I keep saying Sacramento, but NorCal,
right,
Nevada district. So we call, there's a lot of terms we throw out: ethnic churches, culture specific churches, second language churches. What are they actually? What are we saying when we use these terms, and how do you define them?
Yeah, good question. The fact is, we have more and more what I would call cross-cultural churches that I really don't have opportunity to work with, because I have more than I can do with the 100 that are, quote, in my portfolio. But most of them are pastored by, they're all pastored by people who've come from a home country, and they have therefore a burden to reach people who speak their language. Okay. So that's why I think second language often works. And that works well with the deaf community as well, since they have a separate language, if you will.
Okay. What do you mean by they have a burden to speak their language? You mean to retain or maintain?
Well, yeah, that's not what I meant, but that's true.
Okay.
They have a burden to reach people who come from their home country, who are limited in their contacts, and sometimes, the older ones especially, limited in their ability to communicate. So one of the things I've learned in this position is that we worship the Lord best with our heart language. That's something that someone used that phrase. That's really good. The first language allows people to communicate, I think, more their praise and their worship. And so I think these pastors have a desire to make sure there's a place for people who have come from their home country. And they realize many of them are here kind of lost in the American system. And so I think they're wanting to be there for them. And, of course, they want to, as you just mentioned. They want to keep their language, and they want to keep their culture and their values and their traditions. It's very important to them. And so they target people from their cultures.
Okay. Yeah, so on both, but they do have many of them, I'm assuming most of them, really come with a heart missionally. They want to reach others who are maybe from their home countries, have the same language. They want to reach out to them.
Yeah, no, I see three areas where they want to hang on. The big one, of course, is just the culture and the comfort of knowing that they have a commonality in a community, because, as you know, most countries are more communal than the United States is. And the traditional values that they hold on to, they don't find here in the U.S., and I'm afraid they're eroding more all the time. And they want to hang on to those for their kids. And of course, they want to hang on to their language. They see those three things, I think, as a package. And, of course, I laugh when I hear the story, which I guess really is a joke, that the first-generation immigrants, they value the native food, their customs, and their language. Second generation values pretty much the food and the customs. And in the third generation, all they care about is the food.
What's Grandma making today?
Yeah, exactly. And that's a little bit inaccurate, but it's also insightful.
It's insightful, isn't it? I think that's huge, actually. It may be simplifying it a little bit, but I think there is, like you said, some insight into that. So when we say first generation, obviously we know that those are the ones that have come, they've immigrated from their home countries to the U.S. Second generations are their kids. right?
And some were born overseas in their own countries, and some then were born here. And so there's a mix. Many of those will be bilingual. And then I find the third generation, the children of those who are, quote, beginning to be part of America, they tend not to learn their native language, and that really is disappointment to many of their grandparents especially. I was at a funeral recently where a grandmother was being honored, and as her grandkids got up there and talked, one of them talking about a language barrier between me and Grandma. And again, her English sounded Californian. She was Tongan, but she didn't sound Tongan. And I know that's a disappointment to the adults. But the truth is the adults are the ones who are in charge and still control the churches, if you will. And so a lot of the young people are leaving. They're going to what they call the Palangi church, the white folks church, because they can go and worship and communicate in English.
It's interesting when you talk about that, the first generation and the third generation, kind of their grandkids. And we would call that a success, I guess, or a lot of people would call that a success. The the grandkids have fully acclimated. They speak English. They're more comfortable with English. But from a grandparent's and maybe parents' perspective, that's got to be hard. Well, especially when I think not just the language, but the values tend to be eroded. And, and that's one of the things I think I mentioned later on in some of our thinking about our time today is they learn to ask questions. And in most of the cultures I found that we deal with, that's taboo. You don't question authority. You don't question your parents or your teachers or your church leaders. And that carries into the churches here. And at times that on several levels, that's problematic.
Yes, it is problematic. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I could see where that could cause some strife for sure in within families and even churches. So what is this? So what challenges are presented as it relates to the gospel getting out there?
Well, I see it as a double-edged sword. First is what we're talking about, where the challenge is trying to connect with the young people, and there's one classic example. I won't go into a lot of detail, but he came from a Samoan church that was focused on Samoan, used Samoan language, and went to Bethany Bible College, fell in love and married a Hispanic girl. They formed a multicultural band and started ministering and loved it. And so when he graduated and did not want to come back to his home church, his father was quite upset with him. They had quite a falling out. But it turned out this brother was finally able to reconcile with his dad when his father watched how that he has been used to lead worship in many of our larger NorCal, Nevada churches right now. So that to me, that's a success story that even the Samoan pastor definitely could accept finally. He wasn't there to help dad in his little church, but he was able to minister in the church throughout the district. And that to me is
that is a success story.
Is the hope. But it's hard for them because they would like to have their kids stay right there and be part of the community. Communal thing is big. And
there seems to be, in that case, I'm sure there had to be, give and take on both sides, right? To come to that acceptance.
I'm just glad it turned out that the father reached a point where he was okay with it. And that's one side of the sword. And the other side is because of their language desire or to maintain it, they're not good at reaching their communities. As a matter of fact, I can remember going into churches where I found somebody said, okay, you're not this ethnicity. Do you understand the language? And they said, not a word. But they married somebody from that particular ethnicity. And so they're there in the church. And I go to the pastor, if you want to keep that spouse, you need to start using more English. But it's difficult because the old folks don't track well when they're using English. In a bilingual service, the flow is broken. As you know, as missionaries, we have interpreters, and it adds to the length. It adds. It's not as smooth. And then, of course, if they give up and switch to English, the old folks feel left out. So it's not simple. It's a process that we're working on. But again, if people come in from other cultures because the beautiful music or the warmth but they don't hear English, they're not going to stay. So they're not really able to reach their communities. That's one of my big concerns.
That's a big concern. Yeah. And I was thinking even in the overseas, even in a non-U.S. context, let's put it that way, where where maybe the missionary goes to another country. We for example worked in international churches overseas.
So you used English,
and so we used English, but we could tend to have if we weren't careful at some, because the services were in English, but all around us was other, we were in a little bubble, I guess you could say. We were in that little bubble, the English bubble. But some of those young people from that culture loved, getting exposed to the Americans or the Europeans that were there.
Give them a chance to practice their English.
Practice their English.
Yeah.
But what if we're not, if we weren't careful, in some cases, we would kind of draw them away from their native language and their culture, in that sense, and kind of create this little subculture for them. So we, even in that on the other side of the coin, we see that happening too.
Yeah, we don't want to divide families, is what we're talking about.
Right.
Yeah, and that's exactly fear. And yet, I understand the young people. When I taught public education, it helped me see this. When I had students from other countries, they did not want to stand out as different. Mm-hmm. They don't want to be seen by their peers as foreign. They want to blend into the American world, and they want to have a California accent, not their parents' accent. Yeah. And of course, the traditions that their parents may hold dear, they don't want to display them because it makes them stand out as different again. So the young people are struggling to fit into an intensely fierce, harsh times, more and more, I think. Kids are feeling attacked by their peers for whatever. Mm-hmm. So I understand the kids' viewpoint. I really do. Yeah.
So I think we've talked a little bit about this, but is there anything else you would say, because this whole adaptation and change, it takes place over time.
Yep.
And there are lots of challenges with that. But is there anything else you'd want to say about, kind of that the first generation immigrants and their children and grandchildren, what challenges they're facing in their families and churches, and how can we come alongside? Good. How can we help them?
One of the areas that I think I'd like to touch on just briefly is the idea of questioning again. I've tried to help our second language churches realize that that's a biblically sound principle. The Bible is full of questions. God asked them. Jesus asked them. And I try to help them understand it's American custom because we teach our kids to ask questions in our educational system. But it's more than that. It's biblical. I think Jesus used questions to try to help people understand that their limited traditional religious perspective, which is exactly what I think their kids can help them with by their questions. Yeah. It can help them examine their traditions and hopefully be open to some of the struggles their kids are having. But it's difficult because I remember when I was in Fiji, I still remember one time I asked a student that I got pretty close to, give me some feedback on my teaching. He's I'll never forget it. He said, Tala, you do fine. I said, well, I know thank you, but I know I'm not perfect. How can I do better? Tell her, no, you're good. You're good. I said, my friend, please help me. Give me some. He said, it's like this. You give me fish, I pick out the bones, throw them away. It's good. He would not criticize me. It was so against his culture. He would not answer that question. Yeah. And I remember I learned over and over again to ask questions often was meaningless. They just are not going to respond because they so respect the position that I held. Okay. And that's where the adults come from. But their young people don't have that perspective. They don't have that. And so when they ask questions, often their parents really feel threatened by that. Okay. I think they feel like they've lost something in the American world. Okay. And so my big thing is trying to help them realize, no, it's biblical. Jesus used them, and he's not bothered by our questions, and you shouldn't be bothered by your kids' questions. The big thing I point out is the attitude that the person has who's asking the question. And if they're being rebellious, sure, smack them. But not literally. But let them know. But often the kids are really trying to understand, and parents need to be open to that.
Sure. I totally agree with you that a dialogue, a safe place to ask these questions is so important. How do you create that atmosphere, provide that opportunity for them to be able to do that?
Yeah, that's the big question. Right now we are having about every 6 months I do another what we call cross-generational ministry seminar. And I'm trying to get the pastors to come with their church leaders who are adults and also bring their youth and youth leaders. and trying to get them to come together. And I actually, part of our seminar is a time at the end of it where I say, okay, now sit in groups with your church and go back over what we did today and point out what you picked up on that you thought was really meaningful.
Okay.
And then talk about what you can do in your home church. And I'm trying to provide an opportunity where they can, in a relaxed atmosphere, explore things. But that's not the nature. It's not true of any of my church background. They never meet with us and ask youth, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? Pastors tend to be really good at talking and speaking and preaching. We're not so good at listening.
Yeah, and we're really good, I think, at siloing our ministries, even in a homogenous context, where we're kind of all the same language and color, and so that opportunity to connect cross-generationally is really a challenge. We just had a great at our church up in Placerville area. We just had a great connection with our youth this past Sunday, where we brought the youth in, and they did a big. They did the service basically. They basically led the service, led worship, led the speaking time, the preaching time. And it was awesome, but it got me thinking, we have created these silos, to where
youth ministry is a distinct thing in the past anyway.
Yeah. And let's break out of that and start connecting. And so if that's hard up in where in a culturally diverse context where you're dealing with different languages and different ethnic groups, that's got to be a challenge for sure.
Yeah, I provided a list of questions that actually the Filipino Fellowship created, because they're really, of the ethnic fellowships, they are most open to young people because they use English in their services. Most people from the Philippines can think and speak pretty freely in English.
Right.
So every Filipino church I visit, they're still using English only. They'll talk Tagalog or other ethnic or other tribal languages outside of the church service, but and I also see their young people up front leading worship. I compliment them on that every chance I get.
That's great.
Because so many of the churches I visit, the young people are not seen. They sit in the back and they're just not connected. So I try to give them a list of questions the Filipino folks put together for me, and I edited it just here, use these, but I don't know that they do. Because it's just not their nature for the older adults to sit and listen to young people. That's not their tradition. And that's why their young people are so frustrated. That's the American way to some extent.
So, and as a result, they're losing, I assume, a lot of their young people to the church completely, or some of them maybe are going to other churches where they can, English-speaking churches.
Right, yeah, it's both. And one of the things that breaks my heart is Pastor or Dr. Sam has done prison ministry for years, and he pointed out to me that when he first started prison ministry, he didn't see any islanders in our prisons. But now we have good representation of our island cultures in prison.
Interesting.
So the gang mentality is because again, it's a communal thing. It's a place to have identity.
Right.
And they don't find it in their churches because they're speaking English, but they find it in gangs, and that's heartbreaking.
Yeah. Wow, just really presents a need for dialogue and a prayer for sure, but just more dialogue, more connection, and so I really appreciate what you're bringing to that in your ministry and what you do. What are some moving forward for you as we go into the future? We're at the end of 2019, going into 2020, so this is a great time to ask this question. What are some top challenges and priorities related to intercultural ministries that you see going into the future? Yeah,
actually, we've already explored them, I think, very, very meaningfully. But let me go back and just say, the biggest thing is connecting beyond I think a word I use a lot is expectations. I believe most people expect to replicate or to continue what they've always known. And so I think people come from other countries hoping, and that's why I think they settle in groups and enclaves, if you will, where they can have identity. They want to maintain, and I know, we're more comfortable if we can continue what we've done before. You used the word homogeneous earlier. Churches that are that are similar are easier. They're more comfortable because we don't have to worry about offending or being politically correct. We can just be ourselves. Yeah. So one of the things I'm trying to deal with is helping the older folks, especially, well, the young people too, be patient and connect with one another. And so again, we got another seminar coming up in March where Dr. Sam's going to be one of our key speakers this time. But we have a panel, and then, like I said, we have the interaction. So that'll be our last seminar. I brought in a Korean brother, a young man who is their English pastor, and he made a point I thought was powerful. He said, in the Korean culture anyway, and I think this is true in all of them, he says that the two generations both see themselves as victims. And the fact that the older generation feel like, hey, we sacrificed for you. We got you to this country, and we're giving, and we're making a place, and we're doing all these things for you because we love you. But you don't appreciate it. You don't respect us. You don't respond to us as we expect. But then the young people also feel victimized because they say, you don't hear us. You don't consider us. We're not important to you. You don't respect us. So both sides feel like they're victims, which I thought was powerfully insightful. He said something that I don't know how to explore it. He said he thinks the answer might be in grandchildren, because he said the parents love their kids and the grandparents love their grandkids. And he said he had a time when he had the grandchildren pray for both mom and dad and for grandparents. He said that was a powerful time. Now, I don't know what you do after you get them to pray, but it's a very, very exciting idea.
That's an exciting idea. Yeah, that's interesting. So there really maybe there is a lot hinging on this third generation grandkids.
Fascinating.
The bridge building.
There's the word.
Yeah.
And of course, the challenge that is, like I said, the other side of the same coin is reaching people that surround the church. That's, I think, a problem churches have always had. We tend to hang on to what we've always done, and people, we kind of feel, okay, you come to us and we'll let you in maybe. And if you're speaking another language, it's really hard to invite people around. The big struggle I see is connecting with people beyond their island or their home country approach, expectations.
It feels uncomfortable.
Especially the older folks. And again, they're the ones that have the control right now. They have the decision-making power, which is why it's so frustrating to the young people, because they don't see a way to make changes because the old folks are entrenched. And I understand that.
Sure.
I have to quote my friend Cal Swinson, who's our pastoral care director. He used a phrase in a recent seminar: we preach and believe it's all about Jesus. But we live, it's all about me and my values and my expectations. And I'm afraid that's the essence of our struggle right there.
That's convicting. That's powerful. We preach and believe that it's all about Jesus, but we live, it's about me and my values and expectations.
And those values and expectations aren't wrong.
Sure.
Which is why they hang on to them.
Right.
But they're limiting.
Yeah. Well, as we're kind of getting ready to wrap up the conversation here, just I'm just thinking about our churches, those within our church, our churches, myself included, who love interfacing with other cultures, who love being in a context where there's other languages spoken, other cultures represented, other foods.
Exactly.
We like to, we can't we don't have much, diversity in terms of ethnic food options up in the mountains where we live. So we always have to come down to Sacramento.
There you go.
And so we love meeting the owners of those restaurants even, and who many of them are immigrants and are serving up some amazing dishes. But those of us who love, from a relating and presenting the gospel standpoint and sharing Christ's love with people, we don't have to go very far.
No, it's true.
Outside,
especially in California.
Yeah, if we live where we live, we don't have to go very far to connect with diversity. But sometimes, I think we're not sure where to start.
Yeah.
And what are some tips, especially for churches, church leaders, that you can give who would like to, we want to expose our congregations to all that rich diversity that we have right here on our doorstep, and maybe even develop some partnerships. And I think you probably have some dreams in that area.
Absolutely.
So
yes. Yeah. Of course, my
hear from
dream
you.
is we've already touched on is that our churches become multicultural. Realizing, as you pointed out, some of our communities aren't multicultural, so
Right.
you got to be realistic and consider the setting. But again, as we already said, I understand this, and I think this is part of the problem is we need to have empathy and truly try to understand the other perspectives. I know it's more comfortable to be with people who have similar backgrounds and similar values, where you can relax and just not feel the pressure of trying to understand something that you don't. Like other cultures are complicated. Ours are complicated, but we're at least accustomed to them. But my point is, it's not biblical to have little isolated pockets. That's just not the vision. That's not what the Lord had in mind. And I went to a conference a couple of years ago where a black pastor used a phrase that was new to me. He said, we have multicolor churches, but they're not necessarily multicultural. And then he explained that by saying that what we do sometimes is we invite other ethnicities, other races, we welcome them, so we even include them, but they're required to adapt to the traditions of the church. They follow the culture, if you will, the church culture that was set up and maintained by the ancestors or the church. And it tends to be a white church philosophy. He didn't say that, but that's what he meant. And his point was the goal of a church should be to welcome, explore, but then embrace the diverse cultures of those who attend. And that's it's more difficult. I think he used the phrase that we need to invite them to contribute, not just to sit at the dinner table with us, but to sit at the table where we have committees and boards. In other words, where they can make decisions, where they can be involved in the process of setting the pace for the church. So again, Dr. Sam's helped me with this. He points out that people of color will walk into a church and look around. If there are no people of color on the platform, that's a signal. Again, if we want to include other races, other ethnicities, they need to be involved in leadership. If they're not, we're requiring them to adapt to what we've always done.
Right.
And I think that's a powerful thought.
That is a powerful thought. As you were saying that, I was just thinking of the possibilities in certain communities where we have, for example, I've been in communities that have, a predominantly white English-speaking fellowship that rents or offers their facilities for a Spanish-speaking group or a church or another language, and I was just thinking, how could we go a step beyond that? Now, I understand that there's often, there's a balance here, because I understand that from their standpoint, from a language, traditions, cultural standpoint, they like to preserve, they like to worship in their heart language, as you mentioned, and that's important. But how could we go a step beyond that and begin this whole process of, like you said, welcoming, exploring, and embracing in a greater way, and even allowing some kind of partnership to develop where there's contribution, leadership contribution, and so a big challenge, but it would be it's fun to explore.
And I'd like to explore that, but first let me add another comment or two to what I was saying. If I can hammer a little bit, get on my soapbox.
Okay.
I personally had the experience when I returned from our time in Fiji of being free to visit different churches. I was no longer on staff, and so I actually got to, quote, shop around. Honestly, Tim, I was shocked by what I discovered personally as I visited churches, and I'll be very careful now, but people are not naturally friendly. They tend to, trying to understand, I believe they'd come Sunday and say, oh, I haven't seen you since last week, or you're someone I know and I'm acquainted and you're my friend, so I'm going to go talk to you. I haven't seen you for a while. And they ignore visitors. That's human nature. We're not comfortable talking to people we don't know. So I think the church has to make a real effort to help their people reach out beyond. Again, I understand some people are introverts, and that's especially difficult. I tend to be more outspoken. But the point is, it's easier to talk to people I know. And so I think we have to provide opportunities. And I played around in thinking about our time together with the idea of having a ethnic foods or potluck, where you. But it needs to be more than just putting food on the table, because you look around, people will sit at tables with their close friends again. Right. And there's no real connecting. It's just you share their food. Mm-hmm. So we need to do something beyond and specific things like a crowd breaker of some kind that gets people to interact, or maybe interview some people up front where they have a chance to feel like at least those listening say, okay, now I know you better. I can come back back and talk with you about some things you said. Yeah. Or maybe asking people in a panel to share their memories of their cult, something that would give people a way of saying, oh, okay, I could talk to you. That's not going to happen automatically. I don't know what would be the best way to do this, because I know churches are busy. They don't need more activities. Right. But my suggestion would be that you sit down with leadership and you actually ask them, how can we better do this? What can we do to allow people to feel more comfortable stepping outside the familiar circles of acquaintance that are valuable. Again, I understand that. But like I said, I was shocked how we felt like we were ignored as visitors. I was truly shocked. But that's, I think, human nature. But I want to come back to your word for partnership, if I could. I want to jump off on that, because I really think that right now we're encouraging that as a district. The concept that I don't know if your audience would be aware, but we call them PACs. That stands for Parent Affiliated Church. Okay. And more we are suggesting that, back to what you were talking about a minute ago, where churches will share a facility. Right. But in the past, it's been more, okay, you pay us a little bit of money and we'll let you use the room for a few hours every week. PACs are much more than that. It's back to the word you said. It's a partnership where the senior pastor that's hosting, the parent church, if you will, gets with the pastor of the daughter church, and they sit down and dream together and list their expectations and goals. How can they come together and truly combine? If that's done, there's so many benefits to that. Right. The biggest one, of course, is that the daughter church can have a room and have services in their native language for the older folks, but they're young people, they're children. They can go to the parent church services and use English and be immersed in a larger body. Yeah. And the beauty of that is then they can combine their energies and they can go out and do outreach ministries to the ethnic group or to other groups and expose the ethnic folks to other types of ministry.
Yeah, what a demonstration.
Yeah, beautiful opportunities.
Too. Yeah.
And financially, this is what I'm going to point out, it's a win-win, because the daughter church can get under the same insurance policy as a mother church, and it saves them a lot of money. Yeah. And the other thing is, sometimes people new in our country struggle with how to do finance. Well, the mother church can help them with that. They can be considered a department where they have their own fund, but it's under the control, if you will, of a treasurer who's been doing it for years, and a church board that knows how to manage things. And it's just so much safer. So to me, the PAC is a dream. That
PAC, Parent Affiliated Churches.
Yep. And we keep pointing out it's totally wide open. There is no format to follow. They sit down and work out the details. Right. It can be even off campus where they're meeting in a different place, but they're still connected.
So let me ask you, do we have some is this happening now?
Yes, and I'm excited about that.
We have some partnerships developing. Yeah. So this would be, as we're wrapping up today, and thank you again, Dennis. This has just been a super enlightening and encouraging conversation, and I know my listeners, whether they're church, stateside ministry leaders, global workers on the mission field, there's so much to glean from this. I think just in terms of embracing, I just love those three words you used: welcome, explore, and embrace. And and I think that's as you talk about even these parent affiliated church partnerships that are beginning to develop, that is going to be exciting. And I think it would be great. I was just thinking, maybe we could look at a part 2 podcast where we bring in a couple of these.
That would be fun, wouldn't it?
Partnership people that are working together and just pick their brains. What's working? What's not?
That would be good for me as well.
Fun.
Yes, it would.
Okay, so we can talk about that. But thanks again, Dennis. I really appreciate you hanging out with me and spending some time.
Tim, can I make one more comment?
Yes, you may.
Yeah, I look at a little note I made to myself. I think a key word for all of us and all of our ministry is the word listen. Yeah. And I as I prayed about this, I thought, okay, first we have to listen to the Holy Spirit. Yeah. We're not good at that. We tend to do what we've always done, and we think if we can reproduce what we had in the past that was anointed, we'll get the. And
Right.
we, I think, often try to manipulate the Holy Spirit because we want to do what we think needs to be done.
Yeah.
So we need to be open, allow Him to guide us, and to
That's
listen
good.
to His voice. Second part, though, and this we're even, I think, more inclined not to do, is we need to listen to people that we want to partner with. We need to ask questions. We need to, both across generations and across cultures, we need to make ourselves stop and listen to people. Again, pastors are better at talking than listening. And missionaries, I think, are definitely in that category.
Mm-hmm.
So I would encourage all of us to be more open-eared, open-hearted.
Mm-hmm.
Have, what's that King James phrase, ears to hear?
Yeah, ears to hear. That's good. Stop and listen. Good note to end this conversation on, Dennis. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a delight.
Yeah, my pleasure. Great meeting you, and look forward to more conversations
Let's
down
do
the
it.
road. All right.
Dennis's encouragement to welcome and embrace people who are different from us is so applicable for every area of life and ministry. Are we really listening to each other across generations, ethnic and cultural differences? What might it look like in your field of service to model this to an even greater degree? And as far as our personal journeys go, let me encourage you to thank God for the process, even when it's hard. As Dennis reminded us when sharing his story, there is life on the other side of transition. And whatever you do, don't try to navigate transition alone. Reach out for support. Book a discovery call with me at encompasslifecoaching.com to learn more about how working with a coach can help make your transition a success. Well, that wraps up another episode of Navigate, and I've been your host, Tim Austin. If this has been helpful to you, would you mind rating the podcast, writing a review, and sharing on social media? And of course, you can always subscribe that you're sure to get in on the next episode, and I'll catch you next time.